I'm Louise, half of Hamilton Care in Kirriemuir. Thanks so much for coming back and following along with our tutorials. This is number 4 in the series. Previously we've touched on aperture and shutter speeds, and today we're going to do going manual and touching on ISOs. So thanks so much for your feedback and for following along. Just to explain again, this has been filmed during lockdown on my phone, quickly edited on my phone and just popped onto social media. So apologies for the rough and ready approach, but this is the best that we can do under the circumstances. So I'm going to show you a few things on the back of my camera today, just so you can visualise and see what's going on internally. I think quite often the best way to learn is actually to see what's going on rather than get you to read it. Quite often the manual that comes with your camera massively overcomplicates something that's really quite straightforward. So today we're going to quickly talk about ISOs. Now ISO is really just how light sensitive traditionally the film would be, or today your actual camera sensor. So if you have a really small ISO, which is 100, the scale, there's always a scale with these exposures, okay? So there was an aperture scale and a shutter speed scale, and now we've got a scale to do your ISO. So it goes from 100 to 200 to 400 to 800, 1600, right up to 3200 and beyond. Now they're doubling every time, and that again would be considered a full stop for either allowing extra light or half as much light through into your camera. Now if you're on a low ISO, the detail and the fine pixel detail will be so much superior, and the tonal range will be lovely and smooth. As you take your camera up through the ISOs, you're increasing the size of the pixels, and the tonal range becomes less appealing to look at. Now if you could take some photographs on a really low ISO, 1 or 200, and then do the same picture but take it on a really high ISO, if you look at those photographs, but I mean don't just look at them on the back of your camera, if you can download them onto your laptop or your computer and really zoom in and choose an image that's got a lovely plain area, maybe a nice piece of blue sky or a nice soft piece of detail within your house. I know it's during lockdown. If you look at the actual pixels visually, you can see that on the high ISO you can actually see the tones starting to break up, whereas on the really low ISO you get that lovely smooth detail and just a much more pleasing image in terms of the tones. So again, it's something that you really must shoot to actually be able to see the visual difference, and it's when you put your work on a bigger scale that this will become obvious. So if you're downloading your images to print, or if you're looking at them on anything that's not a phone, then that's when you'll really see the difference. It's quite easy to make things look good on a phone or for social media because the image size and the quality is so tiny. But when we start to go big, it's really when we start to notice these little differences actually make a huge difference. So have a go at playing with your ISOs. If you're in really bright conditions, you would ideally want to be using a low ISO, and as your subject becomes darker or the conditions become duller, you could increase your ISO. Quite often we don't have a choice in that because we're shooting under conditions such as low light, and you need a high ISO to make that sensor more sensitive. It's really just replicating the old film that we would use, where the actual film itself would have grains in it that were light sensitive, and these grains would be slightly bigger to catch more light in a higher ISO film. So have a go at your ISOs and just see what difference that makes. Now I'm just going to show you a bit of footage on the back of my camera and cut here, and then I'll come back in a second, okay? Thanks. Okay, now here is the back of my camera. I've popped it on manual, and I would just like to show you the difference that changing your ISO can make. Okay, I've got this on live view, just so you can see what's happening up here, but if you look through your viewfinder, you'll actually see all this internally within your camera. Now, this will tell me here the shutter speed, which is 125th of a second. The little F there with the number after it is your aperture, which is f9 here, which is between 8 and 11. And here is my ISO here. Okay, and then I've got a little sequence down here. Now yours might run horizontally, this one's running vertically at the minute. There's a 0 and there's a plus and there's a minus. The 0 would ideally be the correct exposure, and as this little meter nudges towards the plus, it's overexposed, and as it comes down to the minus, it's underexposed. So we can see here this is about 2 stops underexposed, judging by that white line dropping down to the minus. So what I'm going to do is press the ISO button on my camera, okay, and change the ISO and make it from 200 to 400, 600, 800, 1000, 1600. Okay, now that's now at the middle point, which is saying that would be the correct exposure. Now I've not pointed this at anything spectacular, it was just literally where I was sitting doing the video. So this is now telling me that that would be the correct ISO to give you the right exposure for the shutter and the aperture that I selected. Now I'm just going to take the ISO back down again, and you can just see how dark and how light it can make your image. Okay, so again, if you sit it on a tripod and you have a little play with that, you'll be able to see that that makes a huge difference to the overall exposure of your camera. Now what I'd like you to do is pop your camera on manual now that we've discussed ISOs and aperture and shutter speeds. Okay, now I'm again going to cut to showing you on the back of the camera the way that the ISO and the shutter speeds and the aperture all interact on creating a manual exposure. Now when you look through your camera, I'm going to actually use live view for the demonstration, but I much prefer putting my eye right to the eyepiece and actually shooting through the actual eyepiece. It just takes away all the other elements around me and just makes me really kind of home in on the actual picture that I'm trying to take. It just cancels out all the peripheral vision, and I just feel that it's very traditional, but I'd much rather put my eye against the back of the camera than have it out here and try and see if I can fit it in the frame. It also helps when you're trying to focus as well, if you're actually looking through your lens with your eye really close to the eyepiece as opposed to trying to do it on live view. I don't know how you're finding focusing your images, but that's maybe something that we could look at in future. So if we go on to live view and just do a little demo on manual exposure, keep an eye out when you do this on where internally your meter is, okay, because you need to use a light meter to determine how much light is actually reflecting off your subject matter to be able to give you the correct exposure. Okay, so I'm just going to go and get the back camera on live view and we'll go through that just now. Okay, here is the back of the camera again, and it's saying, and it's on manual, the shutter speed is a 15th of a second and I'm at 2.8, but going by my light meter it's saying that I'm about 2 stops over exposing because the indicator is going towards the plus. So what I can do, I'm fully open at 2.8. The most obvious thing for me to do would be to close that lens down a bit. So we'll go up to 4, 5, 5.6, 6.3, and there we go, f8. The indicators come right down into the middle, which would indicate that's the correct exposure under these particular conditions. Do have it on a tripod, so getting away with a 15th of a second is absolutely fine because I'm not hand holding it. If I needed to put that to a 60th of a second, because I am not on a tripod, I would have to then compensate and change my aperture accordingly. So now a 60th of a second at f4, both would give you the correct exposure. The difference in the overall look of the picture would be the depth of field. Here's the back of my camera again. I've got my shutter speed set at 400, it's on f2.8 and it says ISO 400. Now here's my little scale here, 0 being ideally the perfect exposure, and as it goes up it'd be overexposed, and as it comes down the way towards the minus it would be underexposed. Now there's different ways to get more or less light into your camera as we've discussed, so I'll let you see if I move the shutter speed, okay, by making it slower, how much light actually comes in the back here. And then if I go back to where it was, if I then, my aperture here is at 2.8, if I make that all the way up, this goes black because there's so little light coming in, and as I open it back up to where it was, you can see what difference it's actually making to the exposure. Now this is actually still underexposed, so I could take my shutter speed, okay, and I can make sure that that little indicator sits right back at the middle to give me the correct exposure. What I would say is quite often you're best to slightly over and slightly underexpose an image you're taking, and that way you've got the one that you think would be the correct exposure, one slightly over, one slightly under, and that way you've covered all areas. If you're taking something specific, or you've travelled somewhere to do a landscape, or you're taking something that you might not get the opportunity to take again, make sure you take enough shots of varied exposures to make sure you've captured enough detail in the highlights and in the shadow areas of your image. So when it comes to taking it off your camera and processing it, if you shoot on RAW, you've got as much detail in the extremes of your image as well as the lovely mid-tonal ranges. Hopefully that little demo has given you a bit of confidence to get your camera out, pop it on manual, and just have a play. There's nothing honestly, I say it time and time again, but you just can't replace the actual time that you put in with your camera. If you want it to feel like an extension of your arm and to be able to just pick it up and just take the right shot in the right conditions and have the right settings, you really need the experience to know how to do that. So it becomes quite intuitive, a bit like driving a car. Initially when you learn, you're listening for the engine, you're looking at the actual speed as opposed to just feeling how the car actually drives in a certain gear. So it will be like that with your camera. You'll look at a subject and you'll instantly roughly know by the weather conditions or the light conditions where you're going to start in terms of whether it's your aperture or your shutter speed, and what the conditions are like, whether you'll need a low or a higher ISO to probably be able to achieve that. So again, it's just practice. It's just time with the camera, making it feel like second nature, and the more you do it, literally the easier it becomes. And it's genuinely not difficult. If after doing these little practices you actually prefer to shoot on aperture priority or shutter priority, fine. Just make sure you're still taking photos and you're still enjoying it and you're still creating images that you're happy with. And the main thing is that you stick with it, and then we'll see if we can progress from there in a way that works for you. I'd also like to be able to do some phone photography, so if you've got any ideas about things that you'd like to cover, then again, if you can drop an email to hamiltoncare@hotmail.co.uk, follow us on Instagram and also our Facebook page. Use any one of those methods to get in touch, and we'll hopefully do some more tutorials during lockdown. It looks like we're going to be in this scenario for a little bit longer, so hopefully this will give you just that little bit more of a shove in the right direction to get more creative. Okay, thanks again for following, and we'll see you next time. Okay, thanks.